builder at the moment. I think it kind of encompasses everything I do. But yeah, I've been building communities, I guess, for about 15 years now. I started with some kind of like local meetups in my local hometown in Brighton in the UK. And then that got me onto kind of getting involved in starting a co-working space. And then once you go down the rabbit of co-working, you discover community. And I just went down that whole rabbit hole. And that's kind of where I discovered that when I was doing meetups, I was actually building communities. And yeah, from there, I was a tester at the time. So my way of like getting into building like a community was, well, why not try out building a community for testers?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like a fun kind of side project. This was like 2007. So I kind of kickstarted one. I knew a few people. I invited a few people in. And I just kept kind of building on it. And I did that for about 10 years. I turned it into business. We did conferences. We had an online community as well. We did global conferences as well. And like in our busiest year, we did like 9 conferences in different countries within 1 year.
Oh, wow.
So, but yeah, and then obviously like COVID happened and all of that. And we had already started like moving online and building a platform for that. So we were kind of prepared, but not completely. So
yeah.
I think if we hadn't like started building something, the company might not be around now. So yeah, it's worked out in the end. But I stepped back from running that before COVID, which I feel a bit bad about, but it is what it is. But and then I just kind of, because I had been doing like for 10 years, I kind of wanted to change the scene. And I kind of like had lost interest in testing as a speciality. So it was kind of, it didn't feel as motivating for me to like continue serving the community. But like as a bootstrap founder, I had the opportunity to lead the community at Indie Hackers. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'll happily do that, and it aligns with who I am. And yeah, so I did that for a couple of years, and then alongside that, I started Rosie Land, which was like kind of my space of trying to write about community building from my perspective and from my experience, and really just trying to think about community, I guess, in my way or in a deeper way. And then more recently, I've joined the team at Orbit, and I've been there as a community lead for about 4 months now, coming up to 4 months.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, I would love to dive into each of these a bit more detail in a second. And obviously, anyone listening in, if there's anything you think of as Rosie is speaking that you'd love to ask or dive in deeper, please either throw it in the comments or even just show your face on screen and give us a wave. Something I would like to ask, I mean, first of all, Rosie, I think one of the things that kind of, when I discovered you, I think it was through David Spink's podcast originally. I saw how much you're putting, ideas and things out on Twitter and on your blog. And, that's one of the things I really admire you for is like just the quality and I would say the uniqueness, if that's even a good word to use, of what you're putting out. I love the kind of the different spin you put on things. So yeah, well done with that. And I always try to have a blog on the side while I'm working and stuff, but it always goes to one side. So well done with the commitment of keeping it going as well. That's quite incredible.
Thank you.
I mean, just one of the people who signed up, Jens, I'm not sure if he's on the call right now, he actually asked about, where do you even start when starting a community from scratch? So I wonder if you could kind of answer like his question, maybe tying it with your experience of Ministry of Testing and, how you went about it at the beginning. Yeah,
I mean, it's a really good question. It's probably one of like the most common questions that people have is they want to start, but they don't know how, they don't know where, and it's you can read about like how people start communities, but then like when you apply it to yourself, you're like, well, what do I actually have to do? And I think like one of my motivations for like writing about community building was to kind of think about is there a process, is there a way of thinking about how to start communities that's kind of repeatable as much as communities can be repeatable. I think it's really hard because like every community is different, and you got to take everything with a pinch of salt. But I think like one of the phrases that I've kept going back to is kind of like the art of research. I call it study your people at the moment, but really that's research. It's like if you're going to build a community, you have to know, in my opinion, like you have to know all about everything that kind of surrounds that community. So if we take it from a perspective of something, I guess like Rosie Land is like has evolved into a bit of a community, but like in the back of my mind, as I was starting Rosie Land, I wanted to write about community and like build something towards a community. I thought, well, maybe I can build a community, but it's too soon to just like go out there and start a community because nobody knows me, even though I've been like building community for X amount of years. In the community world, no one really knows who I am. So why would they even listen to me? And I didn't even know what community builders were talking about like 2 or 3 years ago because I hadn't dived into like this specific world. I was more into like the testing world and like figuring out things from my perspective. So I tried to look back at my experience and kind of repeat what I did for Ministry of Testing and apply that to Rosie Land and like look for, kind of try to understand whether it would work. And I feel it does. So but basically, you know, it goes back to this idea of researching and studying your people. And what that really means is that I question is that how can you serve a community if you don't understand the industry that you're in? If you don't follow the people who are writing about it or creating blogs or understanding what they're talking about and the challenges they're having and the things they're moaning about or the things they get excited about. It's like, I don't understand how you can create community if you don't understand those moving pieces. So the basis of like studying your people is go and make sure you're right in the middle of all of that you understand all of that. And once you know who's talking about stuff, then get involved in conversations and ask questions. And, you know, it's basically like connecting the dots or, kind of like building up the puzzle, getting the pieces for the puzzle. Really start to make sense of it. And, it can be a slow process. It's not something that happens overnight. And I think this is something that most people don't bother about because it takes time, right? And like for Rosie Land, I did this in a way that I did it for Ministry of Testing. And the way I did it was I started by 1, following people on Twitter, and then 2, following people's blogs. I think in the community world, it's generally blogs and Twitter. There are, and then podcasts, I guess, is another popular one. There's a few YouTube channels here and there, but not really a lot. But these are all the things that you discover over time, and you start to like recognize the names and the same discussions that come up time and time again, right? But you can't understand whether the discussions are coming up again and again unless you're listening.
Okay. Do you do anything? Do you have any like active things like research calls with people or questionnaires? Do you do anything like that, or is it much more kind of discovery research when you're searching around, like you just said, blogs, Twitter, podcasts?
For me, it's like discovery, and I like to like Twitter is like my outlet of like what I kind of learn. So I don't have like a specific way that I use Twitter apart from the fact that I've got something on my mind. And I just spit it out as a way for me to kind of remember or go back to at some point that, hey, I had this idea about community, and I'm just gonna like spit it out onto Twitter and let other people know, because to be honest, it's like the reaction from people from my tweets helps me think through things, like whether they agree, whether they disagree, and whether they like add something on top of it. It all helps like my understanding of what I'm trying to do. And I also just think like the act of just like writing something down, Twitter makes that really easy, and it helps me remember. And then a lot of my tweets end up as blog posts as well.
You said you mentioned about how you know, when you're kind of doing this research stage, you're just trying to get your ear as close to the ground as possible in the industry you're in. Something I must admit that I struggle with sometimes, and I think something which many people probably struggle with, is actually understanding whether there's a need for this community in the first place. Like clearly, when you made Ministry of Testing, clearly there were a lot of testers out there who wanted some way to connect. Is there any kind of early telltale signs that there's enough kind of here to build a community around, or whether it's worth kind of, you know, how can you kind of judge that early enough, you know, in the community development career, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good way is like to think about like when you're doing your research, can you find anywhere that you belong? So it's like when you're building community, you either start a community or you join one, I guess. You know, those are like two very basic ways of thinking about it. And I think for me, it's like if I'm like, if I had done this research as I was doing Rosieland, for example, and felt like, oh, there's this community where I 100% feel like I belong and I will support no matter what, then I probably wouldn't create a community, because I would probably rather go and support this other community. But then if I felt like actually there's nothing that I feel like I belong to, then maybe that's a sign of, well, maybe there's room there to create something. Because I think it's like, I think quite often we can feel like how we feel or what we think is not how other people feel. But like as I get older, I suppose, the more I realize that actually, if I feel something and I think something, then there's a huge likelihood that other people feel the same way. It's just that I haven't found them yet.
Yeah, I think it's true. You know, like actually a lot of, you know, the best businesses, let's say, are often scratching the founder's itch, right? Like, I've got this problem, I want to fix it. Oh, look, there's a bunch of other people who have the same problem. So yeah, I feel the same. Like a lot of the things I'm thinking about right now are often, I think, trying to solve my own problems. And if the solution exists, I'll try and, you know, use that. And if not, I'll try and make it. Tom Volts has written a question already in the chat. Tom, I'll try to understand here. So he said he's tasked to build a community for a company in the food and drink sector, which is launching. But thanks to COVID, it will all be digital. Do you have any idea how a food and drink sector company might be able to launch digitally, Rosie? Do you have any ideas about what he might be able to do in that situation? Tom, if you do actually want to jump on screen quickly, feel free to tell us a bit more about your situation. And if not, Rosie, I'll give you the chance to have a look and answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly tough with product communities. I think, I find like product communities quite tough, because like, I think because there's the trend at the moment where, since COVID, is that everybody wants a community. So what we end up having now as community builders is these requests coming from top down saying we want community, whereas really community needs to come from the bottom up. It's almost kind of like egotistical or it's like not considerate of like bosses or managers to say we demand a community, we deserve one. It's it has to be from the bottom up with people. That people have, or companies have to earn it, right? They have to do the work to earn it. So I think for any company like kind of trying to build a community around their company, their product, so they have to really think about who their people are, and the most basic way to do that is to stop thinking about community and start with like the most foundational aspects of what community is, which to me is conversations.
Yeah.
So if anyone's starting a community specific, I mean, this applies to any community, but when it comes to like product type communities, it's like the best thing you can do is just to speak to people.
Yeah.
And then as you're speaking to people without any specific agenda, just like trying to understand who they are and what they're doing and what their challenges are, and just trying to help them, then you'll start to kind of notice patterns of things that they want. And it might not be community. It might not be like a forum. But also it's like as companies, we need to understand that communities aren't forums, or they're not specifically events. It's like communities can appear in so many forms, and if we think as conversations as communities, I think companies can get a lot further with building a community that's of real value.
Yeah. Tom, does that answer your question? Is there any follow-up questions you've got there? It looks like I did try to see if you could be added on screen, Tom. It looks like you haven't got a camera available, so I don't think we can add you on screen, I'm afraid. I'll give you a few minutes to reply. If not, I'll jump to the next question. Somewhat, let me reconnect. Okay, so he might be coming back a bit later on to jump in with some more questions, but yeah, it answered his question somewhat. I'll jump in with a few of the ones which were asked beforehand, but anyone listening live, if you've got any questions for Rosie, throw it into the comments and we'll come to those in a moment. So something else people asked online. So you mentioned product like product as in, you know, a product like a food and drink product, but somebody asked about like, you know, in the tech space, product often refers to like an app or digital, something digital. And a lot of companies are building, like, you know, a community around that, whether it's like beta testers or, you know, whatever. Have you got any tips about, you know, having a beta tester community or a community which is mostly with the intention of, you know, alongside a digital product?
Yeah, I mean, like Orbit's kind of doing that at the moment, for example, like as an early product. Orbit's, you know, building stuff quickly, trying to ship fast and trying to work with their customers. I think like the best thing you can do is like, if people really want your tool, is to work with your people as much as possible. Like create a space for them to kind of get support wherever that space might be. It could be, you know, a case of having multiple spaces. I think like we use Discord for a lot of our community beta customers.
Yeah.
For support, for questions, for feedback, but to also like encourage any way of kind of giving feedback and making it easy to give feedback through email, through Twitter DMs and all of that. And I think like with early customers, it's just super important to listen to them and to value them, and to, you know, to kind of give back to them in any way possible. And it doesn't have to, you know, be like this huge thing, but just the act of like communicating well and feeding back and get, I guess almost like I guess, you know, something that we do at Orbit is like closing the loop, is like follow up on people, and it's surprising like how surprised people are when you get back to them like 2 months later saying, hey, we just released this thing that you asked for. You know, here's how to access it. Let us know what you think. And just like little things like that, people are just like, wow, how do they, you know, they don't understand like how people can just like be helpful like that. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to being helpful and finding ways to be helpful, because, you know, we as products, we really need to value our early customers. I think Racket at the moment is also doing quite well with that as like another example. I don't know if people have heard of Racket, but I've been an early user. So it's racket.com. They do short form audio, kind of like Twitter, but for audio. So you have a 9-minute limit on like how long you can talk for, And I saw them when they launched, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I had wanted for a long time to just like have a really easy way to record audio without kind of the faff of like doing any editing and just like,
Yeah.
Blurting something out or chatting with someone. And they were that. And I got on board. I was just like, happy to try it out, have a bit of fun. I would give feedback occasionally. And just like over time, they've just like, kept in touch. There's a kind of small private Twitter group now of early adopters. They've sent me a form to stick my address in so that they can post me something. I've not received that yet, so I have no idea what it is. But it's like, and I've also jumped onto rackets with some of the team as well.
Nice.
So it's just a good vibe, right? And they let us know when they fix bugs, and they feedback ideas to us, and they like give me extra invites to give out to people. All of that kind of stuff is like it makes it more human, right? It's like they care. They're really trying to build a great product, and I like what they're doing, so I'm gonna keep going back there.
Nice, I love that. I think the most important thing, like you mentioned, is the closing the full loop. Like it can't just be. I think I've seen it a few times. Companies ask for feedback, but there's nothing you really get in return. There's no like, we're using this feedback and this is how you've helped, or you're making the impact here, or kind of these are the exclusive things we're giving you for being so involved. So I think closing the loop is imperative.
Yeah, and I think the trap that so many people fall into is like the idea of like, we need to get feedback from thousands of customers, but actually you don't. You need like a really small amount of customers to get really good quality feedback, and to get like this repetitive feedback as well, or repeat feedback from the same person. That's the kind of feedback you want. You don't necessarily want feedback from 1,000 people who don't really care. You want feedback from 10 or 20 people that are going to tell you the things that matter because they've spent the time kind of diving into what you're building.
Yeah, agreed. So Tom has come back now with audio and with video, hopefully. Tom, did you want to expand on your initial question? And was there any follow-up questions from Rosie's answer earlier?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm so Mac. I'm waiting for the 16.
No worries.
Yeah, but we are with hundreds of wineries across the planet, and we're launching something. One of our founders worldwide, so community there where you can exchange etc. Digital. I don't know which. So we can create.
Ooh. Tom, we've lost you there, right?
For Barcelona, one for Madrid, one for London, etc., etc. How can we get this working?
Okay, brilliant. So we lost a little bit there, Tom, in the middle, but I think we've got enough there to probably formulate an answer. Did you want to put yourself back on mute for a second, Tom, and we'll see what Rosie can come up with for an answer.
I just lost you sound.
That's always the way in a live thing.
Did you get anything of my?
Yeah, we did, Tom. I'm just writing to you now so you can see it.
Oh, okay.
Perfect. All right, let's see what we got there. First of all, it sounds fascinating. I'm a big wine lover, so I want to sign up straight away to this. Rosie, have you got any thoughts about what Tom can do in a situation like this?
Yeah, so I guess like what I gathered is like there's these wineries across the world that there's a potential to. Is it wineries or people interested in wine? I don't know. It's maybe Tom can it's wineries, I think. But and then he started asking about tools, what tools to use. I think like what the biggest trap is to jump to the tools, right? And I think this is what a lot of people do, is like when they think about community, they start thinking about the tools to use, or you know, it's like, and does it you know, and when we think of these tools, we start thinking of forums, or you know, things like that as communities. Whereas like when you start, you really have to start small. And, you know, I would start with conversations and find ways to have conversations with people, or start sharing helpful information to see what kind of things people are actually interested in talking about, and kind of building upon that. And even like, you know, like a newsletter is a great place to start a community, and trying to grow that newsletter, and trying to practice writing and sharing stuff that's of interest to these wineries, and it's not easy to you know, engage people, right? It's not easy to figure out what people always want. You can, you know, I've done it many times. You write something, you think it's amazing, and you think people are going to love it, and then you hear crickets at the end of it, right? But the more you try, the more you will discover things that do go down well, and those are the things that you need to like tap into. Is that if something's working, is that, you know, try to discover why it's working. Is it, you know, is it like if it's wineries, I mean, like as an example now, wineries and COVID, I would maybe think something along those lines, and say, how can we help each other in times of COVID? What challenges are people having, and you know, maybe gather to exchange ideas or solutions that people are doing in these kind of times. Just like as one typical example of like really thinking about how you can help. So definitely like focusing on conversations and being helpful, and then as things grow, as you gain more confidence, then look into tools to host these kind of conversations, if you need any at all. And you know, I was looking at like Notion the other day, and they don't have a forum, but they have a really active community, and they have this like one page where they link out to all the community initiatives that are happening. They have member-led meetups. They, you know, there's all sorts, like just like on their community page, but they don't have a forum, and they manage it all through that page and through Notion, and obviously like other things like newsletters and emails. And I think that's an important lesson to remember, is you can achieve a lot without an official community tool.
For sure. I think one last thing I'd probably mention is potentially, you know, see where the conversations are already happening. There are likely places already online where these conversations are happening, and, you know, check where they are. Maybe you don't need to, like Rosie said, build a tool at all, but just jump into the conversations where they're already happening, and maybe, you know, get in contact with them there. We've had hopefully that answered your question, Tom. Hopefully that was useful. We've had a question from Patricia as well now. She asks, do you have any tips of community to inspire/follow? So just, Patricia, if you could just clarify, are you looking for communities which inspire and follow, or are you looking for people who are inspiring in the community industry? And again, feel free to jump on screen if you want to. If not, feel free to write your comment in the chat.
If I think of communities though, like Notions, I think is great. You know, I will tap into like Ministry of Testing as like a really strong foundational community that has a lot of love and support for each other. And you know, obviously I say that because it's what I have experience with. Indie Hackers is also, for me, it's been a great community full of kind of general positivity and not a lot of what would you call it? Like when I had to lead and manage it, there wasn't a lot of kind of bad actors, I guess. So, you know, for me, that's a good thing. And like, I also like think about like how Stripe acquired Indie Hackers and how they've tried to, you know, invest and turn it turn it into a positive community. And I think things like that are also interesting to see how communities can be run by companies, even though in Indie Hacker's case, it was originally kind of like founded and bootstrapped by Cortland. And I'm trying to think of other ones. I mean, like I remember, like back in the day, Flickr was great as a community. I remember, even though I'm not really on Ravelry, the things that I've seen and heard and how it's run as a community, I think is really, really nice. And how, like, I especially admire communities that manage to stay independent as well, where they're like kind of really kind of almost like fighting for their beliefs, and like communities are hard to make sustainable. So any community that can like hire people and employ people and be profitable, I think they deserve so much credit, because it's so hard to kind of balance the books as the tech world is changing, like figuring out how to make money as a community.
I would like to just ask you one question about something you just mentioned. And Patricia, if you've got any follow-up questions from that, please let us know. Rosie, you mentioned that Indie Hackers and Ministry of Testing, they both had like a good vibe and both didn't have many bad actors, and it was just a general positive, welcoming experience. What is key to that in a community? How can you kind of build a community to, as much as possible, ensure that this good experience does exist?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just down to like the day-to-day management of things. So like, there's a blog post out there of that goes along. I'll look it up afterwards, but it's called "We Don't Do That Here." So it's like having this culture of saying, when you have bad actors, it's like, it's a free world generally, kind of. But it's like people are free to do what they want, but you can't be free to do what you want in someone else's house. So the idea of saying like we don't do that here is kind of a philosophy that I've kind of lived by. Even though I read that, I discovered this article afterwards. I just like identified with the approach of saying it. It's like saying, yes, you can do whatever you want in your life, just not here. We don't accept that here. So it's like, go do what you want somewhere else. So like having that philosophy in mind, I think is quite important, and how you manage to deal with that in different ways. So like Indie Hackers is like quite often just like ignoring stuff would generally, if there's any problems, it would just disappear. And like if you try to deal with it, it would actually blow things up. So, I find that interesting. It's like sometimes people feel like you need to deal with everything head on front and like go through a process of dealing with things. But sometimes you just need to mute them and shadow ban them and the problem goes away. So, I found that interesting at Indie Hackers. It's not necessarily how we did it at Ministry of Testing. But with Ministry of Testing, we definitely did things like just like giving as much as we could back to the community. We gave conference tickets away. We would support people unconditionally because we could. We would help new testers struggling to try to find jobs, and we would help people get their first speaking gigs, all of those kind of things. And I think when you give people like their first experience in something, they'll remember you almost forever, because it's like something that's very hard to forget. And the more you can like do that, for me it's fun, and it's inspiring, and it's become a goal of mine almost. Like when I build communities, like I want to help these people. It's like if I can be the first person there, if I can be their first follower on Twitter, I will do that. If I can help someone get their first speaking gig, I will help do that.
How do you quantify that? Like, because it's a really great goal to, have to try and help as many people out as possible. But I'm sure there are so many things going on in the workday which also grab your attention and fires you've got to put out. How do you even think about like, okay, I need to help somebody? Is it like just you do it as and when you think of something, or do you have a more strategic element to that?
It's a good question. I do it because I think it's important. So if it's possible and I can help and it's within my reach, like without like I guess affecting me negatively, or if I have time and resources to do it, that's what community is. It's like community managers or community builders should have the freedom to do those kind of things. They shouldn't have to ask permission to use the resources that they have access to. And I think this is a huge topic that not a lot of communities really talk about enough, because like at Ministry of Testing, I would just give stuff away. Like if people ask for a discount, I'll be like, yep, sure, here you go. No problem. No questions asked. It's like, if you want a discount, I'm not going to say no to you. It's like a crappy thing to like reject someone. And it's just such a better experience for people, and they'll remember it as well if you just say yes to them. And when I think like when we gave away, like I would just like give away like conference tickets to people that I felt like giving them away to, and sometimes it would be like out of the blue. They would they might say, oh, I'd love to go but I can't afford it, and then I would just like DM them and like offer them a ticket or something like that. And people can't believe that people will just give away something of value. And I had that power as like a founder of a community, but I honestly think that like all communities should have the power just to like give stuff away if they feel it's the right thing to do, because they can. And I think like so many businesses try to attach values to it, say, oh no, you can't give that away, it's worth $300 or $500. How are we going to get the return on investment for that? And once conversations start going down that those kind of paths, it's just like for me it's like I can't live like that. It's like that to me is just like you can't quantify everything. We businesses want to measure everything, and I just don't think you can. And there's so many things you can't quantify. And then if we look at communities where people like naturally give stuff away, those are the communities that thrive. In my opinion, it's like this act of giving, this act of kindness, this act of doing stuff that is positive, rather than focusing on are they getting a return on investment.
Which is something you mentioned earlier too. You mentioned about how some of the most impressive product communities are the ones where they get back to them like 2 or 3 months later in a completely unscalable, almost unimaginable way, and yet they still get back to them and say, oh, by the way, you had this impact on this, like really going out of the way doing unscalable work. Just to counteract that question or that statement, then, is there anything you do tend to measure when you're trying to look at the success of a community? Just for you, not even from like above, what do you measure when you're trying to measure success?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like it obviously depends for every community. I think every community needs to have their goals. So like with Ministry of Testing, I had a goal that it had to become financially sustainable. If it wasn't financially sustainable, like as a bootstrap business, then there's questions to ask whether it should exist, because as much, it's not right to ask people to work for free for your community, in my opinion. And for me to become financially sustainable meant me having decent, it was never like overly paid income. It was me being able to hire other people to help me. It was me being able to pay speakers or pay their travel like equally. All these things came into what defined kind of like a sustainable community for me. And if it was not sustainable, then then it's, for me, it's not a success.
Okay.
Because we all have needs, right? But obviously it's like it's not black and white. Within that, I would say for it to be a success, it had to be meaningful enough for me and for the people that I was serving. So I think there's like I guess like overlaps of areas that you need to consider, like what is it you're trying to achieve, and If you have a community of 5 to 10 people, it's like, it's fine, and just like keep it small, keep it casual, and you're having fun, you're getting value from it. You don't necessarily have to turn it into a business. But if you're investing almost like you're, 9 to 5 or 40 hours a week into a community, there has to be that win-win. And I don't think the success comes from like the growth in the users and the data. I think the success is more about the outcomes of the community. I wrote something about this recently. It's like after some discussions that we had at Community Camp, which was like a online event we hosted recently, and Rob Fitz, who's like the author of Mom Test, he started a new community recently for non-fiction authors, and his community is still small. I think it's like a couple of hundred people at the moment. But he was like, as he was starting, he was like getting stressed out about like, well, what's making my community a success? He's like, he was hosting like Q&As or like AMAs and showing up for people, and worried that he wasn't showing up enough or people weren't asking enough questions, and like all of that kind of stuff. But then he said something like which stuck with me, and he was like, at the end of the day, none of these metrics matter. It doesn't matter how many people ask me questions. It doesn't matter how many people show up at live AMAs. What matters is how many people get published, and even more importantly, how many people get bestseller books out there as a result of being part of his community. And that is like almost like the perfect response. It's like, what happens, how often people show up, it doesn't matter. What matters is like that metric of success of who these people are supposed to become or achieve, or something along those lines.
I love that. I mean, I must admit, I've also been somebody who's kind of sometimes got a bit too obsessed with engagement, and like you're chasing engagement. How can we make people talk more? How can we do more to get people chatting with each other? But actually, maybe you're right. Maybe engagement isn't what we should all be chasing, but connection, or like you said, the outcome is what we should be chasing. I really like that. I'll just ask anybody who's live, if you've got questions. We've probably got about 10 minutes left before the end. If you've got any last minute questions you'd like to ask, or anything you want to bring to Rosie, throw it in the comments now. There's a few more left to ask from people who signed up. So yeah, just that's your chance to leave it in the comments if you've got anything live. I'll jump over to one of the previous ones. So somebody mentioned, there's a real specific question here, so which probably won't affect too many people, so let's not spend too long on it. But somebody mentioned about any tips or advice for running multilingual communities. Like if you've got lots of languages in the same community, have you got any idea how they can cope with that?
I have zero experience with that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess like you need I guess people who can speak the languages that you're serving. I don't know. Yeah. I don't have any experience. It must be tough, and I feel for anyone who has to do that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess like with all things like that, I often refer to like systems and processes as like work on finding processes that work for your community. And it's like, and it's like, I think it's super hard to develop those up front, and it's literally like kind of taking one conversation, one activity at a time, and figuring out how to deal with that. And that's probably the most helpful answer I can.
Yeah, it's a very, very specific situation, so I'm not surprised if you didn't have an answer directly for that. You mentioned processes though, and that is something which I might ask you about. Strategy. Let's say you're starting out as a community manager and you want to move this community from 0 to 100. Where do you even start with thinking about processes or strategy? Like, what is your first thought? You mentioned research earlier, but once you've gone through like researching, chatting, is there anything in particular you also think about when you try to get from 0 to, let's say, 100?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I refer to a lot are like flywheels. It's like thinking in terms of flywheels. It's like the way I work, and I just naturally end up working is just like I experiment with stuff, I experiment with ideas, and I build upon them. So, like as an example, let's say like Ministry of Testing, I did conferences. So like the first conference I did, totally made it up as I went along. Had no idea what I was doing. I was, I launched the event like 3 months before it happened. I had to figure out like how to sell tickets, where to share the information about it, how to let people know, how to create a good event, how to how to do follow up afterwards, how to or just create community like throughout the year, and it's like when you do one event, it was small, or relatively small. It was like 60, 70 people the first event. But that was like the foundation of one event. Is like that was like I guess the beginnings of a flywheel. Is like, okay, right, I've done one event, it kind of worked. What can I do to build upon it to make it work? And you start like you stick with things that work and you ditch the things that don't. So it's like one time I tried a bit of ads, not a lot. I probably spent like 100 quid on ads. But like after I tried them, I was like, actually, I don't want to go down this route. This is not the route that I want to take. But it's like as you're doing things, you figure out how to kind of like stack the bricks onto the flywheel, even though that's probably a bad way of visualizing it. But you need to keep stacking like ideas on it to make the flywheel get bigger and bigger, and not assuming that I guess like to gain traction on something is hard. So it's like once you have any kind of traction, adding on to that and experimenting with new ideas is a way to go. And it's like a lot of that I think comes down to processes as well. It's like flywheels are essentially processes. That's how I see them. It's like you figure out the processes that work, and then you keep doing them, and you recognize when you need to stop them and start them, because no flywheel lasts forever, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so for you, like a flywheel is like what, one action or like a series of actions which lead to an output of some kind. Like it could be advert strategy, it could be like the conference which you just mentioned, just things like that which you build up and build up and build up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for each community it would be different. So it's like ads might work for one community. It didn't align with who we were, but like what aligned with us was just like continually working with our community throughout the year, just sharing with our community. We ended up with like this rule of like launching events 6 months before it was supposed to happen, and a lot of that was from learnings of just hosting an event and discovering that actually like the people who buy the tickets aren't the people themselves, they're the employers. And when employers pay tickets, quite often they need 6 months notice to get approval to spend money. It's like to get access to training budgets, and it's extremely frustrating, right? Those kind of situations, but that ended up being the reality we were in, that I had never kind of like planned for. And it would happen at every event. We would launch 6 months before, and like days beforehand, people would come and say, "Oh, we missed the purchasing deadline," or quite often what would happen is that people would they would get approval for like the early bird ticket rate, and then the early bird would expire, and then like they would be like, "Oh, I don't know what to do now because we've only got approval for the early bird rate and not the current rate it's at," and stuff like that is just like you only learn that it happens by doing it, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've got about 10 minutes left, less than 10 minutes left. Last thing I'll probably mention, I think something on a lot of community builders' minds is actually kind of growth. And you just mentioned growth here of Ministry of Testing. How do you think about growth? Obviously, research is the really important stage at the beginning. Is it even worth a community existing? Why should it exist? What the hell will they do when they come together? when you're at the stage when you're almost trying to level up and start thinking about growth, is there anything in particular you tend to think about there, or is it pretty much just what you said, like the flywheels, just keep testing? Is there anything in particular which has worked well for you?
Yeah, I guess what's worked well for me, like Ministry of Testing, is like when we grew, is like look into the community to help you continue that growth. And I guess that, you know, with Ministry of Testing, there's all types of people that have helped it grow in many ways. From like, for example, speakers have helped it grow, you know, spreading the word. So when I think of growth and speakers, for example, I think like the best thing you can do is be good to the speakers, give them a good experience, treat them fairly. In my opinion, travel as a bare minimum, cover their travel costs for all of them, not just like keynote speakers or anything like that. So you know, those are the kind of things that like I did, and then like you know, the best growth always comes from word of mouth, in my opinion.
Yeah. So
it's like the best thing you can do is like serve your people, and hire. For me, it's like hiring people from within the community. Like 90% of the people that now work at Ministry of Testing were all community members. So even like we have even though it's like a community of testers, like our marketing person used to be a tester, but she was really keen to get into marketing. But I was like, well, this is perfect. It's like she loves what we do. She understands what testing is, and she wants to get into marketing. Let's do it. You know, it's super hard to find anyone who does marketing and understands testing. Our community manager was a tester as well, and she was someone who was like super active in the community. And then we saw that she lost her job, and we were like, well, you should come and help us manage our community. And the same for the developer we have. He was like a tester, and he turned developer, and now he helps us with our dev. And I think, you know, that helps. It helps keep the culture, and when the people who work there really understand like the community, it's amazing. And like our employee churn, I guess, is like at 0. I don't think anyone's, apart from me, has actually left. And that's, I guess, pretty amazing for a company that's been going, you know, as a company, it's been going, or since it's hired employees, it's been going for about 4 years. So that's, you know, I guess that's a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, that's admirable for a community, let alone a company. Like, that's really, really incredible for like a company to have such a low churn rate. So good job in, you know, building the foundations of that. We're almost at the end now, so I just want to turn it over to you, really. Is there anything you'd like to leave with people? Where can people find you? And is there any kind of, why do you do this, Rosie? And what would you like to leave with people today?
Why do I do this? I do this because I've long thought that community is the answer to everything, and I kind of think it is. I think like if everything in the world was more community focused, then we'd solve so many problems.
I agree.
So that's why I do it, and I also do it because I believe like we're at a point of change in the community industry, and I'm pretty excited about that, if I'm honest. And I kind of think like there's room to come in with new ideas, and that's really what I'm trying to do. And when you like mentioned like my Twitter and like putting out new ideas out there, it's like I'm trying to test my views of community. I want to like really like. I think it's easy to assume that things are one way and they always have to be that way. And I'm trying to question myself. I'm trying to help people view community in different ways to get more creative. And I definitely don't have answers to everything, but I'm, you know, questioning stuff. But if you want to find me, I'm just as you just messaged there. I'm on Twitter a lot at Rosie Sherry, and I also write a lot at rosie.land, and you can also find me hanging out at orbit.love.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Rosie. I found it fascinating to chat with you the last hour. I know there's been people here who also got a lot from this conversation. So thanks so much for joining us. And thanks everyone for listening in. And I'll bring you another AMA with some very interesting speaker next month, hopefully. So yes, see you then.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.